Adriana, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So Adriana is a client of mine. She is one of the members of my beta group of the Master the Mic program. And I'm so excited to be helping her in the process of launching her podcast because Lord knows we need more mujeres in our community talking about a very important topic that we're going to dive into today, which is estate planning, which sounds like it's only for old white people. But I promise you, everybody and anybody who has a loved one, has someone they care about, is a caretaker, needs to be having these conversations.
Absolutely.
All right. So tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
I'm Adriana Brava. I'm an attorney in California, and I have my own firm, estate planning, and my background was in workers' comp. And I know we'll get into that a little bit, why I changed.
All right. So you are an attorney by training. Was this always the dream?
I want to say it was always the dream. Maybe I wanted to be a doctor for a while. It's totally all the things you talk about because you're just trying to
first-gen goals.
Yeah, you're just trying to figure out, how am I going to get ahead in life? And so lawyer was my way to get out of what I saw a rut.
Bring us back to your origin story. Where did you grow up and maybe what inspired you to take this journey as an attorney?
Well, I grew up in Lomita, which is a little town here in the South Bay area of Los Angeles. I grew up first gen. My parents were from Mexico. My mom was a housekeeper, and my dad, we didn't grow up with him, but he was a farm worker. So I just really wanted to figure out, how can I get ahead? How can I get an education so that we can prosper? And it really was something that initially was all the things you talk about, how am I get my whole family? Because it's not just you that you're trying to push forward. You're just trying to bring everyone with you and you want everybody to rise with you. I said, as a lawyer, I think I could do that.
Where did you study?
I studied at UC Berkeley, which was a total culture shock.
I can imagine. I mean, that's a very prestigious school. So how does a Latina from the South Bay of Los Angeles end up at UC Berkeley?
It was the best school I got into. And I said, it's a public school and that's what we could afford. Actually, I couldn't afford, but student loans and all that. And so I credit my high school counselors for being so good about steering me in that direction, in the college direction. And so I've always been inspired by teachers. I still keep in touch with my 6th grade teacher because he's an amazing Black man who has talked to us about the system and systemic oppression. And he just inspired me my whole life. Yeah, I have a dog now because of him, because his dog had puppies. He's like, you want a puppy? Never go see puppies unless you actually know you want a dog. I fell in love.
That's amazing. It's a relationship that keeps on giving all this time later.
Yes.
That's amazing. And for all the educators that listen to this show, I want you to know that you do have an impact. And I know it's a very different world that we're living in now where I feel like a lot of people in power are trying to silence teachers and trying to control what they can share with their students. And so for those who are still taking the risk, I would say at this point, to educate students, not just on the academics, but also on how the real world works, your voices are more important than ever. So shout out to the educators. Okay, so tell me about your career. So you graduate and how do you pick your field? So you started you said workers' comp?
Yes. So I actually started in civil litigation and class actions. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot, but the person I was working for was not the most ethical. He's actually disbarred now. And so I figured out that I wasn't in a good spot. And at the time, my then husband, who was also an attorney who I met in law school, he encouraged me to leave and we'll figure something out. So I found this other firm that was pretty close to home. And I thought, okay, I could do this for a while because it's convenient to home. And then I actually fell in love with helping people who were injured at work. Their lives are upside down. When you don't have an income, it impacts the relationships in your life. It impacts their self-esteem. And so I became really good at working with people in those situations. And so I was like, yeah, you're an attorney, but you're also really a counselor. And you're just trying to help people see the light that there is something beyond their injury and that they don't have to let that define them. because a lot of people get into that mindset that I'm hurt and I can't work the rest of my life, or you have to really help them overcome. And so I did fall in love with that. But it's a very volume-based business. And when I started working at this one law firm, it was fine. And then towards the end, it wasn't anymore. It just became very toxic because they wanted more work and they were accepting cases from retiring attorneys while also laying people off. And it's just, the math ain't mathing and you're not providing the service that you really want to. So I was super burnt out. I actually thought maybe I'm just going to leave the law. Maybe I just want to be a travel blogger, which is why I signed up for your vlogging class. I just didn't know what to do. I just know I needed a change. Oh, and I started listening to your podcast, which is very dangerous. It really it needs to come with the warning sign. I actually went back because I thought, we did your author meet and greet. And I just thought this is such a full circle moment because I went back and I looked at my text and I started sending your podcast to my coworkers at the time. And I'm like, hey, we need to listen to this. She's talking about some really radical things that, we don't have to stay at a toxic job. And so I thought it was so cool how it's like a full circle now.
Yeah, I love it. So you find yourself on the other side, which is burnt out, feeling like you're probably not being compensated for the amount of work you're being asked to do, and I think a lot of folks can just kind of resign themselves to it is what it is. So what did you actually do once you realized you were faced with that situation?
Well, I need to figure out an exit strategy because, you just can't up and quit your job at this point. I had 3 kids and was in another marriage. And so I just thought, okay, how am I going to do this? And what I did, I guess I could maybe go about it by saying you have to figure out how you can leverage your knowledge of your workplace and maybe any things that maybe are not above par, maybe some things that you can have claims against. And you need to leverage that and figure out if there's a way that you can walk away with something to set you forward. And so what I did was I kept listening to people like you and I just kept searching. I actually joined your blogging course. I joined like a group coaching that was a marketing. I didn't even know it was for marketing. I was like, how am I going to have a marketing without having a business? And I just joined a lot of stuff because I knew that I needed a change. And so I would say, even though all of those weren't exactly the place where I was going, I was taking action. And I do feel like at some point, all those little things do add up. And so that's how I left. You just leverage the information you know about your workplace and talk it over.
So what did that look like strategically? Because I know when we've talked in person, you mentioned you were able to walk away with like a huge severance package.
Yeah, I can't talk about all the details, but I can tell you that if there's illegal things happening at your workplace, if there's discrimination happening at your workplace, if that you're being looked over and you're much more qualified than someone who's a male who has like no experience and they happen to be the same religion as your boss, if you know all that, you have to speak up and you have to say, hey, I'm not going to take this. I know I have rights. And so that's what you do. You look for the places where you can have some leveraging power. And that's where I think a lot of people don't know. If you're fired and like you're over 40, you are a protected class. So a lot of people don't know, like maybe I should see if I was wrongfully terminated.
For age discrimination or?
Right, for age discrimination. There's like a presumption under federal law. So I happen to know that because I'm an attorney and I was working in workers' comp, which is very closely related to employment law issues. There was always usually some sort of employment law issues. Maybe they didn't get correct wage and hour, things like that. So I would say for the common person, if you feel like your workplace, it's not passing the smell test, like you have actual things that you can talk about and that you can pinpoint, then I would say consult an employment law attorney, because that's right there going to tell you a lot of things about whether you're in a position to negotiate or whether it's just an unfair crappy situation, because there is a difference. There is a difference.
Yeah. And I imagine a lot of it also has to do with the state laws in under which your employer is operating, right? Because it's not like one size fits all potentially.
Right. And so you do have federal protections, but yeah, your state, and especially California, gives you even further protection. So it depends on what your state says. But yeah, if you know that this is not only crappy, but this is probably illegal, like you need to go talk to someone who can tell you yes or no, and this is what you can do about it.
Basically, you walked into your employer's job or your employer and you said, hey, I'm going to leave, but I also know there's some weird shit going on here. So are you guys going to pay me for my silence? Is that basically like what? Yep.
That's not, you know what? I can't tell you, I can't get into all the details, but I can tell you that you do need to have a conversation, and you need to come in with the position of authority, not like you're cowering, like, oh, you know, X, Y, and Z. You outline what it is, and you go in there and say, how can we make this a win-win? How can I walk away and you let me go, and we're both still friends at the end of the day? Because I do talk to my other, I don't have the best feelings about them, but I did work with them for a long time. And especially one of my bosses, I do keep in touch with him somewhat, because you don't want to walk away burning bridges if you can. So go in just like you're having a conversation. This is what's happening. This is what I think my rights are. And so how can we make this a win-win?
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Okay. So you find yourself, you walk away from this career, you have a financial runway potentially. Like, what do you do? What's the first thing you do?
The first thing I did was take some downtime.
Yes. I don't think enough of us do that in between a career transition, and I highly recommend it.
Yeah. So I took some downtime because I just was really tired of leaving my house at the early morning, getting back late, and not really being a part of my household, not being a part of my kids' lives, not being able to volunteer at their schools. And so I just kind of wanted to let myself have that mental break, because I really was going in the direction of some sort of mental breakdown. I had high blood pressure because it was so crazy. And if I stay on this trajectory, I'm going to have a heart attack. Like, there's no way this is sustainable. So I needed to have that like downtime to just breathe. And so I did that. And I had already been talking to some mentors about what I can do. Like I said, I had already been thinking like, this is not okay. Like, I need to do something else. So I had talked to someone from law school. He went as an older gentleman. And so he's getting ready to retire. He's like, Adriana, you need to come to estate planning. I love it. And he's just like talking about it like it's the best thing on earth. And then I talked to someone else, and she was like, yeah, you need to come on board. So I thought, okay, I'm going to give this a try. And so I signed up with UCLA to take like advanced courses, because some people would have just jumped into it. But I really felt like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, Like when I did workers' comp, I became a specialist. I took an extra bar. Like, if you do something, you just got to go in and do it well. I had these informal mentors. And so that's just how it happened. What really helped me was a coach that I heard on the Quiero, Dinero podcast. And so I had my business coach, because so much of it is mentality and just believing in yourself that you can do it. And because there's so many unknowns, like, how am I going to do it without steady income? Am I going to be able to figure out how to get a business license? Am I going to figure out how to have insurance for healthcare? I mean, that's a big one too, and for your family. So there's all these like, I don't know. And you have to be able to like face it and be okay with it and not freak out.
So what made you want to take the approach of becoming your own firm versus working for somebody else just in a different space like estate planning?
I didn't want to be in that position again, where I'm at a point that I'm in burnout, in a toxic situation. There's like just crazy shit happening, where like someone should be at the bottom of the totem pole is like all of a sudden above everyone. Like, that, it doesn't make sense. Like, am I in the twilight zone? So I didn't want to be in that again. I was like, there's no way. I'm at a point where I just need to create my life and figure out how I can do that. So
yeah. I love it. So I've spoken to lots of attorneys on this show, and we have a lot of them who are also like listeners of the podcast, especially people of color. And I think there is a general like fear of that, putting yourself out there and kind of like starting your own thing. So can you talk us kind of through maybe the first year? Like, what was the strategy? How are you going to get clients? How are you going to market yourself? Like, what did you do?
Honestly, I didn't really have a plan. And people would tell me when I was like, because I've been 20 years in practice, they've been telling me for a long time, why don't you start your own firm? I just never saw myself as that. I was like, oh, I don't think I could do that. And so for me, being around other people that have businesses, especially women, especially Latinas, and seeing what they go through really helped me because honestly, I didn't have a plan. And so when you see somebody else is struggling with a certain area and you're like, hey, I could relate to that. What did you do? I mean, even just simple things like, how do I do a QR code for a Calendly? When I have support through being in this group coaching program, and they're like, I got you. Here, let me show you how. And so really a lot of it is referrals too. I actually get a lot of my business through personal referrals, people who know me. And so that was part of my first year. And also part of it was doing contract work, which I still do some because, I kind of feel like it helps me get my name out still because what I do is I do depositions for a friend of mine who has a law firm doing workers' comp. That's steady income. And I get to tell all the opposing attorneys, they're like, hey, I haven't seen you around. And I'm like, that's because I have an estate planning law firm. And here's my business card. And they're like, you know what? I need an estate plan. So you create funnels as you go, especially like social media. I had to get over myself. I had to get over myself a lot. I have like my face on my business card, which I've never done before. And I'm like, you know what? I think it's good. People want to know who they're working with. But 5 years ago, I would have never thought something like that. And so a lot of it's just getting over yourself and just like being okay with failing at something.
Yeah. I think so many of us have like this imposter syndrome, like we're not qualified to do the work that we do. And I'm just like, I want to remind y'all, how many years of education have you put into getting the skill set that you have? How much time and energy have you put into not only self-study, but formal study? Like there's nothing that's an imposter about you. And the sooner that you get over that shit, the sooner you can start making some money doing your own thing.
Yeah. And if you don't know how to do it, I mean, like seriously, get help. I know I keep talking about my group coaching girls, but they're my girls. I mean, like we're very core. And like one of them is super good at social media. Like she loves social media. She's on it every day. And so just being around people that are like doing the things that you should be doing, it helps you and inspires you to be like, okay, I can do it. I can do it.
I love that. Okay, so let's get into estate planning because this is one of the topics that I talk about in my book, Financially Lit. It was a really important topic for me to include in the book because I don't feel like there's enough personal finance books, especially for people of color. I mean, that are even talking about this, right? They just want to focus on like budgeting and saving and blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, okay, what about for the people who are actually building like generational wealth, which is such a freaking trendy hashtag nowadays, but nobody actually understands what the fuck they're talking about. Because if you don't have a plan to transfer this money, it's not generational wealth. Okay. It's just going to die with you. So tell me, what are the biggest issues that you see as like barriers to entry for our community specifically about why maybe we're just not having these conversations? Let's start there.
One, there's a lack of knowledge in our community that this even exists. Like this is even an option. This is something that they should think about.
It's for white people.
Yeah, this is for white rich people. Yeah, it's like we're the housekeepers and grow up like that. Oh, that's not for us. That's for like the ladies that were cleaning their house, So that's one thing. And then the second thing is there's a lot of superstition in the Latino community. Oh, no. If I talk about that, pues ya me voy a morir.
Yeah.
And they avoid it like the plague because they don't want to talk about death, even though it's 100% going to happen at some point. They also don't want to talk about incapacity because incapacity is actually a big money depletion. It's like if you're incapacitated, you don't have your powers of attorney, it's going to cost thousands and thousands to put you into a conservatorship. And, your family's not going to even know how to do it. So there's just a lot of this fear. Like, I don't want to talk about me becoming incapacitated. I don't want to talk about death. And so I think those are the major two issues that is a barrier. And also the language, because a lot of people who came here as immigrants, maybe like in the 70s, 80s, they were able to get ahead in life. They were able to buy homes, but maybe they're monolingual still and they don't understand the language. They don't have enough attorneys who are bilingual. That's another thing, just the language barrier, especially like older folks.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right. So for folks who have no idea what the heck we're talking about when we say an estate plan, can you give us like a overview of like what those key documents are?
Yes. Okay. So if you are over 18, you absolutely need to have a powers of attorney. Okay. That is like the entry point. That is so important because those are the powers of attorneys is really it's going to protect you during your lifetime. Like the trust, the wills, insurance policies, all of that's going to help your beneficiaries. All of it's going to help you create generational wealth. But while you're alive, you need protection because otherwise, you just need one thing to happen and your finances go in disarray. So power of attorney for healthcare, because you want somebody to be able to talk for you in case you can't, or in certain cases, which like I just had something recently, somebody called me and they said, hey, my child, who's an adult, but like I think she's 21, is in a mental institution and they won't give me any information. Can I do a power of attorney? No, by that time it's too late because you need to have mental capacity. So, and then another situation I know that's a very long-term thing also, her adult son is incapacitated and she can't make medical decisions for him. They assigned him a social worker. So you need to have that because if you don't, you have to go apply to be a conservator for that person. It takes money, it takes court time, and the judge has to appoint you. So it's a headache. All you had to do was get your powers of attorney. So that's for healthcare and finances. So finances helps you in the event you're incapacitated, that someone can step in and take care of your finances, whether it's paying your mortgage or calling your utility company, anything that
Filing your
involves
taxes.
right, anything that involves finances. And that person should be trustworthy and very responsible with money because they're two different things because you don't necessarily want to pick the same people. Someone might be really good about respecting your wishes that you said, hey, I want a DNR. Do not resuscitate. And somebody could be really good with that, but bad with money. But you have someone who maybe is really good at money and not the best at other things. So you want to pick your people well and make sure that's someone you trust.
You know, I had a very interesting situation with the power of attorney when I was getting divorced. So my ex, when I filed, he was going through mental health issues and decided to like check himself into a clinic, right? And meanwhile, I'm like, okay, both of our names are on the lease for this house. I want his name off. And luckily, because I had a power of attorney, I was able to send that to the leasing company and get his name removed from the lease. So I didn't have to worry about him being able to use the argument that, well, we're both on the lease, so you can't kick me out of the house. That was very, very convenient. Okay.
That worked out for you.
It definitely did.
You're one of the few people that actually were proactive because most people I ask, do you have a power of attorney? They're like, first of all, what's that? And why do I need it? And so, yeah, let alone have it. Yeah, you can do a lot of things with the power of attorney. Otherwise, if you don't have it, who's going to be able to pay your mortgage because they couldn't get into your bank account? Who's going to be able to pay your rent and you're going to become behind on your rent or simply your phone bill? So you come back to this life, assuming that you regain capacity and it's a mess and you've got like bills stacked up and maybe you have like, a notice that you're going to have to leave your apartment because you didn't pay rent. So you don't want to come back to that. You want to come back to like a fairly decent lifestyle.
Yeah. Okay. So I think a lot of people, when they hear the word estate planning, they automatically think of a will, right? And so what does a will cover?
Okay. So a will covers like your worldly possessions. The thing with the wills, now that's state specific. So all this information, obviously disclaimer, it's meant for legal information, not legal advice, all that good stuff. But every state has a different take on it. So you have state specific rules, but generally speaking, yeah, it covers like your basic house possessions, your car, things like that. Things that are really not of a whole lot of value is what I would say you should do that. I mean, yeah, you could put your whole estate in a will. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the best route because like if you have a house, you have to go through probate. So it doesn't cover you in all situations, which is why I think you really need to get an assessment. But yeah, so you could technically put everything in a will. It doesn't mean you should. But as opposed to a trust, where if you have property, then you don't have to go to probate court and you can transfer that asset a lot easier. So There is a difference. You also have to, depending on how it's done, because some people don't necessarily do it the right way. Theoretically, you could just write it on a piece of paper, and that's a certain specific type of will. But, if you mess it up, you don't want to do that. I mean, there's that come out all the time. I get the alerts, like there's a new case. The guy had an estate plan. He wanted to change it because somebody he had fallen out of relationship with. And he wrote it down and he put it in his closet, eventually died. And they found that. And the court said, no, that wasn't valid because it was not changed in the manner that was specified in his estate plan. So you have to be careful about what you put in there and the manner that you put it in there, because it has consequences.
Got it. Okay. So I like to think of like a will as the catch-all for anything else that you haven't specifically put into like a trust or accounts that do not have beneficiary. Like you can have beneficiaries for your retirement accounts. You can have beneficiaries for investment accounts. You can even have like assign people to inherit your bank accounts and things like that too, correct?
Yes, you should do that. I think that's an easier way to transfer assets. Just do the beneficiary. At some banks, though, they actually want something called a payable on death, POD. So if you are a Chase Bank person, you have to go sign their PODs. So that I think people should talk about with their bank, because they have their own things. And then sometimes they will make you go to probate. So a person can have a trust and still go to probate if they didn't do everything that they had to do, because that's what you call funding the trust. So if you have a trust, but you didn't put anything in it, like you're still going to probate. So there's a lot of nuances. But I will say that for like a brokerage account, there are certain accounts that you do want to put in your trust, because then you get like a step up in basis for your beneficiaries for the capital gains on that. So there are some things that you do want to put in there. Not all things though. Like, you can put your life insurance. It just depends what strategy you want to take. These Vanderbilts and all these big
The
names,
Rockefellers.
the Rockefellers. Yeah. Those are like actually the two most famous case studies as far as estate planning. So the Rockefellers, they did have life insurance on their people, and their life insurance went into the trust, which helped them build more generational wealth. And that was actually managed by professionals, not by like a family person. So they've been able to maintain all their wealth because of all these strategies. So yeah, you can put your beneficiary on the life insurance, but if you want to be more strategic, or if you want to do that, you just want to keep funding and creating generational wealth, then you might want to put it into a trust. But yeah, there's a lot of accounts that you can just straight put a beneficiary. If you don't have a beneficiary at the very minimum, then you might end up in probate. So do something, whether it's putting it in the trust or beneficiary. And if it's a certain brokerage account that had a lot of capital gains, consider putting it in the trust.
Okay. All right. So let's talk to the folks who know that they could potentially inherit real estate from a parent. What is the conversation they should be having in order to facilitate that wealth transfer and make it as least costly as possible?
A lot of parents, I think you will tell them, hey, would you rather that I have $50,000, or would you rather that I write that check to the IRS and give it? And so that kind of gets them thinking. And you want to start off obviously by saying, look, I hope this doesn't happen for a long time. I hope we don't have to worry about it for a long time, but this is a reality and I don't want to inherit a headache. I don't want you to leave and then I'm fighting with my brothers and sisters because you didn't give us directions. Even the fights start in the hospital when people are sick. If they don't have powers of attorney, then the kids can't decide, this is what we want to do. No, let's pull the plug. No, let's wait. So I don't want to be in a position where I'm fighting with my brothers and sisters. And I want us to talk about how we can make a plan for when you eventually pass away. What do you want to do with your house? Do you want to give it to us? Do you want to give it to someone else? And how are we going to make that happen? Because if we don't do it, then we are going to end up in court and we're going to have to pay attorney fees, an exorbitant amount, and you're going to have to pay court fees. We're going to be there a long time. Sometimes the judges don't have time on their calendar, so they put you off to a new date. I don't want all that. You have to tell them that. I don't want all that. And I don't think you want that for us either. So if you want us to keep being friends with our siblings, with our tias and tios, then we need to come up with a plan. And that's how you just start off with that like heart-centered space. I want to be in peace when you're leaving. I don't want to have to be mourning your death and also figuring out the legal system. I don't want to have to figure this out later when I'm sad, when I'm crying. Same thing with like funeral plans. You want to try to do like a pre-planning because funeral businesses are huge. And when you're sad and you're mourning, oh, I just want to give my parents the best thing, and yeah, sign me up for a $50,000 funeral because it can happen. Yeah, it's crazy. And the funeral people are more than happy to make that happen for you.
Well, of course, they have guaranteed pool of customers for life.
Right. I actually think the first time I had an experience with the funeral industry, it was when my stepfather passed away. And I was like, oh my God, like, how are people citing this when they're super not in the right headspace? I almost feel like those contracts should be illegal because one of the main things about contracts is that you both have to go in it with good headspace. So anyways, but do all of that because you don't want to be in that position where your parents have passed away. You didn't make a plan, not only for your estate, you didn't make a funeral plan, and you guys are scrambling to get like $20,000, $30,000. There's a lot of ways you can do it cheaper. You don't have to go with the funeral, like get your casket through Costco. There's so many things that they don't tell you. And because you're sad and mourning, you don't even care at that point. You're just like, I just want to bury him with a dignified funeral. So all of those things, you need to mention that to your parents when you're starting this conversation. I don't want to be sad and figuring this out. I want to be able to mourn you and be at friends with my sisters and brothers and not fighting.
Strategically, would you recommend a trust or that's something that you would like ask folks to investigate on their own, just like the transferring the property into a trust that then has beneficiaries?
That would be, I think, the ideal solution. There's some states now, again, this is general information. There's some states that have like transferable on death, or they call them ladybird, but California doesn't have them. So that's going to be a jurisdiction specific one. But generally speaking, you do want to do the trust because if you don't, then you go to probate, especially if you have a house. The house, I think, is the no-brainer. You could also put your businesses in there. You can put your rental properties. At a minimum, if you have a residential house, you should put it in a trust.
Okay. Now, I hear you say the word probate several times now. A lot of folks don't even know what the hell that is. Can you tell us what it is?
Yes, let's back it up. Okay, so if you are going to file bankruptcy, you go to bankruptcy court. If you're going to get a divorce, you go to family law court. If you're going to sue someone, you're going to go to civil court. So probate is just the name of the court system that you go into when somebody dies without a will or trust. It's an intestate. And so that means there's no testament. And you have to go through this system because somebody has to validate who gets what. And so each state has like their pecking order of like, it could be, do you have children? Then it goes to your children. No children, then maybe it goes to your parents. So they have a certain specific order that your state will say, this is what it gets. So it's up to the probate court and the probate attorney to figure out who gets what according to the rules of the state. Not because you don't get to say anymore. You don't get to say because you didn't do anything ahead of time. So the relatives that are listed in these state guidelines, that's who gets it. And so the probate judge is the person who's going to be signing the orders, and somebody gets assigned as your representative. Now, anybody could ask for a probate to be opened if they're your relatives and it's somebody who's like the most aggressive person who's like, no, we got to get this done. That's who's going to do it. And they're going to ask to be assigned as your personal representative. If the judge says, yeah, let's do it, then that's who it is. And that might not necessarily be the best person to deal with stuff because maybe they really are looking out for themselves. Maybe they're not going to treat other people fairly. So that's the system that you go into when you die without an estate plan.
Got it. So pretty much, y'all, the message here is that if you don't create an estate plan, you are subject to the one in the state in which you reside. And that shit's usually not going to be anywhere near as efficient and maybe even as favorable as had you taken the opportunity and the time to be specific in your, family's goals and desires when it comes to passing on the wealth.
Absolutely. That is 100% true. Okay. This is how I think it's a little bit simpler for people to understand. If you're going to get a divorce, you have to go through your state's rules. And some people have a community property state and some people don't. And so in order for people to say, no, we don't want that, they do prenups or they do postnups. And so that's a lot more common. So people understand that. It's the similar analogy. So if you don't have a prenup, you're going to go with your state's rules. The judge is going to decide for you, unless you have decided that for you. It's much better to decide it with your spouse while you guys are on good terms when you're thinking about like, oh, is this fair? Because it's a lot more friendly process. So it's a similar, actually, estate planning. I mean, probate court is basically called the second divorce court because that's where people go get divorced from their aunts, uncles, brothers, and sisters. I mean, it's super serious. A lot of the stuff that comes out in these estate planning cases are so interesting. So interesting. You know, people who had like a child out of marriage, but because they were married, they wanted to inherit from their biological. So it's just all these very interesting things that are all relationship based. And so if you don't take care of it, somebody else has that plan for you. And so I think that's an easier way to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Crystal clear on this side. Okay. Let's talk about parents, right? Because I think parents would initially default to where I want my kids to inherit my wealth. But what about if your kids are under the age of 18 or under the age of majority?
Right. So if your kids are under 18, they really can't inherit. Somebody's going to have to be their guardian for them and be their conservator. And actually, that's actually another thing that if you have minor children, you really want to estate plan because you don't want like a relative that doesn't share your views, maybe your religious upbringing, whatever it is, that you want to say so and who your kids are going to go to and live with. I mean, that's first and foremost before finances. You want to decide who's going to share your values, who's going to raise them the way you want to. But yeah, secondly, they're going to need a nomination of who's going to take care of their finances. And in protecting your kids, there's a lot of other positive consequences that could happen. So like, I'll just tell you my story. When I was a single mom, I had bought a house and I thought, oh my God, who's going to get my house if I die? My like 5-year-old kid, which basically just means I'm giving my house to my ex-husband because who's going to be his guardian? He would be his guardian. So I put my house in a trust. And at that time, I had no intention of remarrying, thought, I'm living a really happy life. So down the road, I did get remarried. And so not only did protecting my house protect it against my ex-husband, but like it protects it against future marriages. So I didn't mean for that to happen, but that's just a natural consequences of like making good decisions. So make good decisions for your kids because otherwise you're going to maybe have them end up in foster care for some time until they figure out who's going to get them, who's going to take care of them. You don't want that for your kids.
Yeah, that's a real world consequence for not like taking the time to really make those decisions. And I don't think people understand that just because you like ask somebody to be somebody's godparent, that's not actually like a real thing until it's on a legal document.
Yes. And the judge has to appoint them. So there's certain things that you really do have to go still through a judge. Like one of those things would be if you want to adopt somebody's kid because their parents passed away, like you still have to go through the process, but it's going to be a lot easier if you've appointed someone as opposed to like if a judge is like, well, now I have to do character fitness and, things like that because maybe somebody has a criminal background and maybe they got disqualified. The judge is going to do whatever they think is in the best interest of the child. That's absolutely the first and foremost standard, what's in the best interest of the child. So they may not think the way you think.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So in your situation where you ended up putting your house in a trust, so who would manage the trust in the event that you pass away until your kids are
at that time I had put in my sister because that's who I trusted and who I thought would be able to deal with the managing of money and all that. But now my son, my oldest son actually just turned 18 in the fall. He's still not ready. I mean, and that's the thing, with the trust, that's the beauty of a trust. You can put in provisions like my child is not going to get in until he's 25 or graduated college. You can put in those things. Whereas if you go to probate, you can't do all of that. And so someone who's not responsible, because they're young, because they're going to go waste your money that you spent your whole life creating, because, they don't have good judgment yet or good money making, good financial literacy, So you could put in those restrictions, or like, my child needs to go take a financial literacy class. It's beautiful, because if you have a special needs child, somebody who's disabled, you can do a special needs trust. So there's so many creative things that you can do. And anyways, the question was about my house. So you could actually change your trust. So that's also the beautiful thing. Depending on how you structure it, you have a change of situation. Yeah, you're going to want to change it. You got married, you got divorced, your children are now grown up. They're adults. They don't need guardians. So all of those things, you're not going to want to do a one-time estate plan and never look at it again. You're going to want to change it as your life changes, because God forbid that I ever have a falling out with my sister. I wouldn't want her to do that. I don't think I will, but I'm just saying things like that happen all the time, and people don't change their estate plans, and stuff happens. I read cases all the time. Like I said, there's this. Oh, and then it's public information. So it's all like, you're just like, okay, give me the tea,
Right.
And
It's
so
oh, wow. So my ex-husband just inherited my wealth because I didn't update my estate plan to reflect the fact that we're divorced.
You see that all the time.
That's terrifying. Okay, so I'm sure there's a lot of folks who are listening to this and like, okay, I know I need to do this. How much does this cost? Because that's always the thing that stops people from doing this.
I understand that is a barrier, but I wouldn't say ask yourself how much it costs. Yes, you do have to ask yourself how much it costs, and you have to kind of shop around for what's in your budget and who you trust to do this plan with you. And you also have to trust them that you're going to be able to speak with them in a way that you understand, that you could ask questions. They're not rushing you. So I would say, like, I'm in various groups of estate planning, and I would say the medium is probably between $400 to $6,500 for like a run of the mill, like full estate plan. If you don't need a full plan, and that's for married people. So if you're single, it's going to cost less. But I think really the question is, what's it going to cost you if you don't plan?
Ooh.
Because I can guarantee you that, like, if you invest $5,000 in estate planning and you have a home that has basically appreciated over the past 30 or 40 years, you're saving your kids like thousands and thousands of dollars. We're talking like 80 grand, 90 grand in taxes that they're not going to have to pay. And we're talking about probate attorney fees. They're much more expensive. Like a lot of people are like, yeah, don't do your estate plan because I'm going to take your case on the probate and I'm going to get about 10 times more than I would have got if I just did your plan. I mean, some attorneys think that way because they talk about all these DIY plans that are popping up, and that's left to see how it's going to be. It's interesting because a lot of people are using it, and I know it's a cheaper route, and I know it's a lower entry to get into. And if that's all you can do, that's all you can do. But a lot of people are saying that they're doing probates on these because they're like I said, there's a lot of nuances. So they might say, oh yeah, I created my trust. Here's my trust. I did it. But they never changed the deed to their house. So the house is not in the trust. So there's all these little tricky things that could happen if you're trying to do it yourself, but you don't realize what are the rules. Like, you don't know what you don't know. So I would say try not to go with like the cheapest run of the mill place because they're not going to give you individual attention. They're not going to individually analyze your case and talk about these relationships. You want someone who's going to ask you a lot of questions and get information from you to figure out, okay, you know what? I think this is the best plan for you. Or here's some options. And, most attorneys will do payment plans because they realize like that's a big chunk of change to ask someone to just fork over. But like I said, ask yourself, how much is it going to cost if I don't do it? Because that price is going to be a lot higher than what you invest. And those same people who, I'm just going to say, so same people who bitch about like, oh my God, it's so expensive. Excuse me, I see your $2,000 purse you got on you, or like, I see these designer shoes that are, so it's not, don't say you don't have money for it. You do have money for it. You're just choosing to spend your money elsewhere. So it's not impossible. People get it all the time. You just have to say, I'm going to buckle down. I'm not going to go on a vacation this year, and I'm going to do my estate plan. And so it's not that they don't have it. It's just that we're not accustomed to invest in legal services. And guess who is accustomed to investing in legal services?
Rich people.
Hell yeah. I mean, like, lawyer on speed dial because they know how essential it is. They have their CPA on speed dial. They have their financial advisors. I mean, it's a team. Attorney is just like one part of this like team of wealth building professionals. So you have to start thinking if you want to build better and do better for your kids, you have to start thinking differently than what we grew up with. I can tell you when we grew up, we were on survival mode. I grew up in public housing. My parents didn't have extra money. I mean, we didn't have anything. So we didn't have those conversations.
Right. There was nothing to transfer.
Right. So you need to start having those conversations and think differently because now I think there are a lot of first gens who have been able to, be like me, get ahead in life a little bit. And you want to protect that. And you also want your kids to do better. I think you always want your kids to do better than you did.
Absolutely. What's the point if that's not, the ultimate goal? And I would just want to give one tip for folks who have corporate jobs that have robust benefits packages. One of the things that you might have access to as part of your corporate benefits that you don't even know is legal insurance. And legal insurance is a very cost-effective way to get financial support with legal services. And it is the way that I used to build my entire estate plan for $0. This is like a program that I was paying like $8 every paycheck. And one day I said, I need an estate plan. I found the attorneys that take the plan on the website, made sure to do my due diligence, get good reviews, check that they're still barred, all that stuff. And I found somebody who was able to do the will, the trust, the power of attorneys, all that stuff, and nothing out of pocket. So y'all, there are options. Just make sure you're paying attention, especially during open enrollment season, which is usually in the fall.
That is true. Legal plans are interesting. I know someone, a good friend of mine they're enrolled in that. And I wouldn't say it's like the best source of business because they don't always get the full attention. But I think if you have like something very basic, like say you're a single person, maybe you don't have any beneficiaries, it's ideal, I think, for certain segments of the population.
Yeah. For sure. And if it's going to be the barrier that you don't get anything, especially something that's actually reviewed by an attorney, I would much rather you do that than go to rocketlawyer.com and like try to DIY your way to this shit and then realize, oh, wow, this is all useless.
Correct. Yeah. Something is better than nothing. Absolutely. Yeah. Especially powers of attorney, guys. I mean, there are some states, not all states, but they might have like official state forms that you can vouch for because they're provided by the state. So there are certain things that, yes, you can do, and it's better than having nothing. So a DIY, though not ideal, can work for some people, and it's better than nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. This has been such an interesting conversation. I know folks are going to want to find out more about you. For people who are located in California, I'd love for you to tell us how we can find you. And for folks who want to learn more about this topic, please tell us about your show.
About my show. I'm going to have a show maybe.
Yes.
Okay. We're going to talk about that
here first.
Okay. So I have 2 physical offices, one in Long Beach and one in Santa Ana. So that's Los Angeles and Orange County. But I do Zoom throughout the state. So we don't have to come in. There's DocuSign. There's things that we can use, technology. So you can find me at my website, adrianabrava.com. You can find me on Instagram. I'm under Adriana Brava ESQ for Esquire. Also, I have a Spanish brand that I am still figuring out and iterating what I'm doing with that. But there's a Spanish version that is for Spanish speaking folks, Madrina Legal. And I'm super excited because that's why I took the podcasting course. I really want to do a podcast long form instead of just like, I got to do like 30 seconds and catch someone's attention because they're scrolling. And someone who wants to dive in a little deeper. And so, yes, that is one of the things I'm working on, Madrina Legal podcast. It will be coming out, I want to say in the fall, probably October. And so thank you for.
Absolutely. And the fact that you're doing it in Spanish is so important because like you mentioned in the beginning of our conversation, one of the biggest barriers is the language, just being able to find a culturally competent attorney who understands what it is to be from a Latino community, who understands the unique things that we deal with, and who is able to provide legal information and advice in a really compassionate way.
Yeah. And life experience, having 3 kids, you figure out like what's important, like when my 18-year-old turned 18, I was like, oh shit. we got to do powers of attorney for you because if something happens. And so, that's what organically happens, So now not only do I want to do the podcast, I actually want to do an online course for 18-year-olds to figure out what are the legal possible pitfalls and avoid them, signing contracts for your lease. I mean, dating a minor, hell no, that's a no-no, so like there's stuff that I am figuring out because I have life experience and I'm like, okay, my kid, he got into college and I don't need him to mess it up because now he took his girlfriend's sister who's a minor and didn't ask you think of all these things that could happen. And so I go, you know what? I want to make this like, so other people understand it. So a lot of things are great when they happen organically like that.
Yeah. I love it. We're going to make sure to have all of the links in the episode show notes so you can find more about working with Adriana. I want to thank you so much for your time, for your knowledge, and for serving our community who is much needed. We need to keep having these conversations because if you're not planning for the next generation to benefit from all of your hard work, then you are wasting a whole lot of time.
Yes. And thank you, Janice, for all the impact you've had. I mean, all the ripple effects that people are saying, you impact people in a way you don't know. And for the fact that I went back and looked at my text and I was sending your stuff to my coworkers, like, we got to get out, it's like you have had a big impact. And so, I mean, you could be the most brilliant firework, but if you don't have that spark that like lights you up, it's not going to happen. And you're that spark for a lot of Latinas because you understand how we speak, you understand how we think, and you understand first-gen problems. So thank you for being that for our community.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you also for endorsing the chapter on estate planning in the book, because I know you told me this is very robust. Like, I'm very surprised about how detailed it is. So if you guys want to learn more about this topic too, make sure to pick up a copy of Financially Lit.
It was a great chapter. I actually thought that you consulted with an attorney. I was like, oh, she must have consulted with an attorney because this is like so detailed and all this, all like the different trusts. And I was like, that's way beyond like common knowledge. So
I love it. Thank you so much. All right, y'all. Until next time, stay poderosa.